Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
I'm Robin.
And we're here this morning to discuss Torah portion Nasso, which is found in Numbers chapter 4, verse 21.
It's a long
on
one.
Through the end of chapter 7.
Isn't this the longest portion in the Torah?
This is the longest Torah portion in the Torah.
So are we going to be able to fit this into our time?
We're going to talk for hours.
Okay. Well, we do. Just maybe not online.
It would be easy to do. So, now, this Torah portion actually needs to include the first 20 verses of chapter 4, where the census of the family of Kehot is found. And then this Torah portion in chapter 4, verse 21, picks up with Gershon and Merari.
Because it's a continuation of describing the three groups.
Yes.
What are those three groups?
Well, first of all, we have the 12 tribes. But there's always a hidden 13th tribe. In this case, the tribe of Levi, which is the priestly tribe.
Pretty important.
And they're not counted among the rest of Israel. They're kind of a separate group. And Levi, if you read back in Genesis, Levi had 3 sons, and those sons were Kehot, Gershon, and Merari. And so over the last few hundred years, they have each grown into a large group. So you have the Kehothites and the Gershonites and the Merariites, if that's how you would say it, but the family of Merari. And so the Levites are divided up into these 3 groups. Now, these groups weren't priests. Only Aaron and his sons are the priests.
Right.
Priests were only the descendants of Aaron.
Okay.
But Levi is called the priestly tribe because all of their work centered around the tabernacle and service in the tabernacle and then later the temple.
And they were assigned with very distinct tasks.
Very specific tasks. And there's a lot we can learn from those tasks.
Well, in the very opening of this portion, it is once again mentioned to lift up the heads.
Yes.
And I want to return to the fact that it isn't just about counting.
No.
It's really to ennoble or to remind a person that they matter.
That's right.
And I think that is a theme of these chapters, to let us remember and be reminded, and to remind each other that we have a divine purpose. We have a divine purpose. And it's when we forget that or stop really believing that our life no longer reflects the thing that God intends for us to do here.
Every one of us has a place that's assigned, and it's like God lifts our head, looks us in the face, says, I've got a job for you. And where we get into trouble is when we decide, well, I think the job that guy over there has would be better.
Well, that's why I noticed in verse 22 when it says, take a census of the sons of Gershon also, or as well, as if to say, even though they're carrying the curtains and the soft parts of the tabernacle, the outside part, if you will, they're not assigned with carrying the furnishings and the pillars and the ark and the important stuff. And they could have said to themselves, well, what I'm doing isn't as important as what they're doing. Isn't that what happens?
Oh, yeah.
In the body, or even in a family, or even in a marriage.
So, and in Corinthians, Paul talks about, one says, well, if I'm not an eye, then what part in the body do I have? Or if I'm not an ear or a finger or a foot, we're all assigned as a part of the body of Messiah. And
I have come to realize that the way I approach any task before me, whether it's making challah bread or hosting a meal or visiting a friend, the way I approach a task is what can make it dynamic or not, what can elevate it to the divine or to just diminish it to the mundane. It's my attitude, it's my heart.
And every job is vitally important.
It is.
Some may be more public than others, but everyone's important. And if the Gershonite society, we just don't want to do this anymore, well, then the whole thing falls to pieces.
We know what I was thinking, Grant. I was thinking about, not only is this a reminder to us that even the tasks that don't seem as important as others are just as essential in the whole scheme of things. They really are. But on the other hand, the tasks that God gives people that are super precariously holy, like Aaron's sons, what did they do? They diminished the importance of their task in their mind and thought, oh, it's not a big deal. And look what happened.
And later we'll be getting to the Torah portion, Korah. And we'll see what happens when somebody like Korah decides, I want a different job. I want to be promoted to do something different. And what a horrible outcome that brought on, because the ground opened up and swallowed him.
Well, we have to hold these two extremes in balance. The message, I am nothing, and the message, I am everything.
Yes.
And I am reminded of Matthew 18, where it talks about the shepherd leaving the 99 sheep because he notices that there's one missing.
That's right.
And I love the idea and the truth that our Father, he counts us each, and he lifts up our head, and he looks in our eyes, and he says, you matter. And when we cease to show up, he chases us down, and he brings us back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. So I know while you're talking, I keep thinking, we'll share this on an upcoming episode. I'm thinking of that dear friend, childhood friend of my mother's that we got to meet. And she had written some poems, and my cousin Tennessee sent them to me. And she wrote this amazing poem about her job was to basically make the beds and sweep the floor. That was her job, and she was just content and delighted because that's the job God had assigned.
Because she knew it was important.
And she brought such glory to God in her life.
And she affected so many people's hearts.
So stay tuned. We'll share that poem.
So returning for a few moments to the three groups, we have those.
Well, let's just take them in order.
Tasks. Let's do that.
So in the end of the previous Torah portion, the Midbar, we're given a description of Kehot, and Moses and Aaron were members of the family of Kehot, of the Levites. And their job was to serve in carrying the furniture of the tabernacle. So the things like the altar and the laver, the table of showbread, the golden incense altar, the menorah, and of course the Ark of the Covenant.
And these weren't carried in their hands.
No, they were carried with staves that went through rings, so they had to carry them on their shoulders.
And it was really important that they didn't just reach out and carry them like they were everyday objects.
Exactly.
And they were covered.
Yes, they were all covered, so you couldn't see them. They weren't put on display. And I have to chuckle every time I see a picture, an illustration of the Kohathites carrying the ark. I'll see them in a Bible or a children's Bible story book or some illustration.
The flannel graph.
Yeah, they always show them carrying the ark uncovered, and it was always covered by the veil. The veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place was placed over the ark, and then there were a couple of covers put over that, takash skins, and then techelet, the blue covering. So you never saw the ark.
Why is it important that it's covered, Grant?
And well, it's a picture of Messiah.
Yeah.
The ark was a glorious gold thing. It was the centerpiece of the temple and of the tabernacle. And so to speak, that ark came and dwelt among us and walked among us. But he came to us, Paul says, in the likeness of sinful flesh.
Yeah. You know what it speaks to me too of the secret things of God, because these furnishings were the internal sacred parts that were hidden in the most holy place, and they weren't just to be treated like common for the world to see. And
they weren't for entertainment purposes.
No, boy, there's a lesson there.
And
but
speaking of the veil that covered the ark when it traveled, when Yeshua was crucified, what was torn? The veil.
Right.
And when his flesh, which is like the veil, when it was torn, the veil in the temple was torn as well. But the ark, that's his very essence, his soul, his spirit, who he is, that was untainted, that was untouched. But the veil, the covering, the flesh, yeah, it was greatly damaged. You know, when Kehoe carried these things, there's some lessons we could learn here. They had to use constant vigilance, because if they tripped, this thing could crash to the ground. So stumbling equaled disaster. They had the heaviest responsibility. And so when they're walking, if picture yourself, you're one of the men carrying the ark. And I'm sure there were 4 men or maybe 8 men, 2 on each end of each stave. I don't think they were engaged in casual conversation when they were carrying the ark in the wilderness. I think they were focused on what they were doing. There was great danger in what they were doing. And there's a warning here in chapter 4, verse 17. Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, do not let the tribe of the Kohathite families be cut off from among the Levites. In other words, there's danger. Their job is so vital, so important, so central, but the most dangerous. Thus shall you do for them, so that they shall live and not die when they approach the Holy of Holies. Aaron and his sons shall come and assign them, every man to his work and his burden. But they shall not come and look at as the holy is inserted, lest they die. They had to be so careful. What they were carrying was the very holiness of the tabernacle. But it was deadly. It was something that had to be respected. They had to have fear of God and an awe. And there had to be balance.
Balance
of
is
holy terror,
a real theme,
but also
for
the
sure.
joy.
Yeah.
Think of the joy you have.
Yeah.
I get to help carry the ark.
Yeah.
There's this tension, this balance
Well,
of
it
joy.
kind of
and fear.
depended on their attitude. They could say, wow, this is heavy and this is a huge burden and why do I have to do this? Or they could say, what an honor to carry these furnishings.
Right.
So let's
Now,
move on to the other groups.
So the furniture needed a house. And that house is called the tabernacle. So the tabernacle is made of fabrics, soft materials, and is made of bars and beams and pillars and sockets.
Like the skeletal system is the way I think of it.
The hard part. So Gershon, here in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, is given the responsibility of carrying all the coverings, the screens, the curtains that went around the entire outside of the courtyard.
Right.
And the ropes and all the things are pertinent to these fabrics. You can imagine how much work that was, folding everything, and this stuff would have been
Keeping
heavy.
track of it all.
But they got to put everything in a cart. They didn't have to carry it on their shoulders. They were given a wagon to carry these things in. Merari, who's described here now in verse 29 of chapter 4, his job is to carry the pillars, the bars, the sockets, the beams, all the solids, like you said, the skeletal structure of the tabernacle. And they also had wagons to carry these things in. But Kehoe had to carry everything on their shoulders, the furniture. And you know, as I was thinking about these, about the soft and the hard, I started thinking about those attributes that are often discussed in Judaism, and you find them in the scriptures. And those are the attributes of chesed and gevurah.
Right.
Chesed and gevurah. Chesed is translated loving kindness, though that doesn't even do the word justice. But we'll just go with that, loving kindness. It's that loving kindness that a parent feels towards that newborn baby. But chesed that is not restrained turns out not to be either loving or kind.
Like softness.
Yes. I've seen parents who love their children and are so tender towards their children that they don't know how to say no to their children.
They destroy them, right?
And their children will ask things and desire things that are very harmful to them, but the parents don't know how to say no. And unrestrained loving kindness can be deadly. Now, no one has greater loving kindness than God himself, but there are times he says no. There are times he brings discipline. And he knows where the restraints should be. Those restraints, that's what we call gevurah. So chesed has to be tempered with gevurah. It has to be tempered. And if it is, then chesed reaches its total fullness. And our children will not only grow up knowing they're loved and taken care of, but they grow up to be strong and self-disciplined.
You know, I couldn't help but notice also when I see three categories, I tend to think in terms of body, soul, and spirit.
Yes, right.
And Gershon, of course, had the responsibility of overseeing the external parts, the parts that we're seeing, like the skin, the body part. And then, of course, Merari with the structural part. I think that would really represent the soul.
Absolutely, the soul.
The real structure, who we are.
Right.
And then the keyhole with the internal furnishings, those really the transcendent parts of the tabernacle that represented our connection with God.
That's right. And so Kehot carries everything on their shoulders. They have to be very balanced. And it's the spirit that informs the soul and the body. And we have to bring our mind, will, and emotions, our souls, and our actions and speech, our bodies, in alignment with what God's Spirit says as it's revealed through His Word. And so Kehot represents that balancing attribute between Chesed and Gevurah. And that's called Tiferet.
Which is beauty.
Which is beauty.
Because balance is found in...
Yes. When you see things that are in perfect symmetry like this,
it's
that
beauty.
Is biologically, that is how we recognize beauty, when things are symmetrical, when things are balanced. And even the word Tiferet, it begins with the letter Tav, it ends with the letter Tav. It's even balanced. And right in the middle of the word, just 5 letters, is the letter Aleph. And so even the word Tiferet is a balanced word that represents beauty that comes from symmetry and balance.
So fascinating.
Yeah. So
well, it would be easy to camp out here,
would.
Let's move along to this whole passage that describes the Sota, or the suspected unfaithful wife, can be pretty perplexing.
Yeah.
It was quite an elaborate ritual and seemed kind of demeaning to a woman when she was brought forward by a man who suspected her of being unfaithful to him. So let's jump in and just do this, because I know that it can make you scratch your head and even kind of, wrinkle your nose a little and say, what is this about?
Yeah, well, it's called most English Bibles will talk about the wayward wife or the straying wife.
Suspected straying wife.
Yes. She's not necessarily guilty of what she's suspected of doing, but the husband's unsure. And it talks about if a man becomes so jealous because he thinks his wife has strayed away, she's called the Sota. Sota is a word that means to waver. Or to twist a little bit.
Okay.
And so the husband just doesn't know. She'll say, I was not unfaithful. And he'll think, but she happened to be sequestered with this man for a period of time, and something could have happened.
And how do I know?
And he can be eaten up with jealousy.
Well, I thought it was fascinating. I discovered that Rabbi Hirsch points out that only if the husband himself has never been guilty of unchastity can he impose this ordeal on his wife. So a wayward husband can't just throw his wife out in public and humiliate her. That is not what's going on here.
No.
This is a husband who's trying to protect the sanctity of his marriage.
And in our 44 years of marriage, I've never been in the position of the jealous husband who suspected his wife. But I can imagine what torture would it be. Because I know of men, I have friends whose wives were unfaithful, and during that time of uncertainty, they were just tortured, wondering, were they unfaithful to me? Are they stepping out on me?
Some of the sages even point out that this would especially apply to a woman who's carrying a child. And suddenly a man has reason to suspect that it might not be his.
Right.
And that could cause all kinds of problems.
Well, in Judaism, they've often said that the foundation of Judaism is the home. The foundation of the home is the family. The foundation of the family is the marriage. And the foundation of the marriage is the faithfulness and the physical intimacy between husband and wife.
And I'll go a step further and elevate a woman's role to being the guardian
Yes.
of that relationship. And it might not seem fair, but you know what? It is an honor. And it is a responsibility for us to say this matters enough that I'm going to encircle the relationship and the purity of my marriage. Because if that starts to waver, everything falls apart. Look around. Look around. You know, we live in a world that says, why does what I do in the privacy of my own bedroom matter? And how does that affect anyone else? One of my favorite talk show hosts is Dennis Prager. And he shared a principle years ago that I have really appreciated. He says, if you're wondering if a particular behavior is good or bad, imagine for a moment if everyone in society began to do this particular behavior or participate in this behavior. What would society look like? And I thought, you know, we have the Torah that gives us the perfect bullseye of life, but sometimes it can get a little gray when there are behaviors that people participate in. So I've started to really apply that. And recently, you and I took a little side trip to get away.
Just last week.
And we randomly visited this little town here in Ohio where it was like all the restraints had been removed. And this town just literally flew the flag of immorality. And it was so in your face that you and I just kept feeling like we were not even welcome there.
It's a beautiful town, historic town, just a beautiful place. And but it becomes somehow a hub, a magnet for people who are just caught up in sexual perversion.
And the women who I saw walking the streets,
that we thought were women.
Well, we weren't sure. You know, that distinction had been removed deliberately. And I now have come to realize that when a person doesn't have value for who they are and they really don't have self-respect, they don't understand their true worth in the eyes of God, then suddenly they're desperate for some kind of outside validation. And I think that that's what happens for a woman who does step out and commit adultery. She forgets her true worth inside a marriage and thinks, I'm only going to feel better about myself if I can receive attention outside of this relationship. And it's a mess.
It is.
It's a mess. So when this woman is brought forward, let's kind of describe what this ceremony is all about, because it can feel really peculiar.
Yeah, it can. Well, let's just look at it here. When the husband just can't live with this situation anymore, he has to know, has she been faithful or not? She is brought before the priest. And in verse 19, chapter 5, verse 19, the Kohen, the priest, shall adjure her and say to the woman, if a man has not lain with you, and you have not strayed in defilement with someone other than your husband, then be innocent of these bitter waters that cause curse. But if you've strayed with someone other than your husband, and if you have become defiled, and a man other than your husband has lain with you, and the sentence is not completed. Then verse 21, the Kohen shall adjure the woman with the oath of the curse. The Kohen shall say to the woman, may Adonai render you as a curse and as an oath amid your people, when Adonai, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, causes your thigh to collapse and your stomach to distend. In other words, your reproductive system collapses and dies, and you with it. These waters that cause curse shall enter your innards to cause stomach to distend and thigh to collapse. And the woman shall respond, Amen, Amen.
In other words, suddenly she no longer can be a life giver.
Right, yes. So what has happened before then? He's taken an earthenware bowl. He's poured holy water in. The only place holy water is found in the Bible.
So that came from the laver. Okay.
Which is made from the mirrors of the women, remember?
That's significant, right.
It takes water from the laver, and then he takes some dirt from the holy place in front of the veil in front of the Holy of Holies. He takes some of that and puts it in the water. And then he writes these curses, and this is where we come to in verse 23. The Cohen shall inscribe these curses on a scroll. Now, these curses we just read in verses 21 and 22. And twice there, Adonai, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, is mentioned. So God's name is written twice on this little scroll.
All right.
And then he will erase it into the waters. So
he scrapes it off.
Yeah, he scrapes off the ink into the waters.
Wow.
You're never, ever allowed to defile God's letter.
It's a desecration.
Four-letter name.
Absolutely.
It's a desecration. In fact, when I'm printing out notes or copying things out of a book and God's name is there, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, I never throw that in a trash can.
We bury it.
I have a folder. It goes into a box, and because it has God's name on it, it goes in there. And then when this gets full, then dig a hole. We bury this like it was a person, and even say a blessing. And because that's the respect I have for God's name. And to be here at the tabernacle, and this is water from the laver. This is soil from the holy place.
Why in the world is Hashem willing to have his name scraped off in this instance?
Well, I think Rabbi Menachem Schneerson put it best when he wrote, "The woman in this episode is not a paragon of moral behavior, even if she is innocent of adultery. And yet, even for such a person, God is willing to have his name erased in order to clear hers." That's chesed. That's loving kindness.
And not only to clear her name because she matters, but to reestablish peace and harmony within the home.
Right.
Because shalom between a husband and wife is the seed for our whole world.
That's right.
Having peace. Whether you believe it or not, it's true.
It's true. So he scrapes off these words, the ink from these words, including God's name twice, into the bitter waters. Verse 24, when he shall cause the woman to drink the bitter waters that cause curse, and the bitter waters that cause curse shall come into her. Then there's an offering that's brought, and it turns out, as you go down to verse 28, if the woman had not become defiled, if it turns out she's innocent and she is pure, then she shall be proven innocent, and she shall bear seed.
You know what I found interesting too is I learned that this ritual was only effective when purity of marriage mattered, and people believed in the effectiveness of this actual ritual because they had a fear of God. When that no longer was the case, this ritual was not even observed because it no longer worked. Which brings me to that story when Yeshua was presented with the adulterous woman by the men of the town, and they didn't really care about the purity and sanctity of marriage, and they certainly didn't care about her. And Yeshua brought it around and knew that.
Yes.
And he said, listen, if you've never sinned, you cast a stone here.
Yes.
And then he looked at her and lifted up her head. It makes me cry. He lifted up her head and he looked at her. He says, you matter.
Yeah.
And he said, go and sin no more.
Yeah.
Because that is what he cares about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, when we were talking about this in the car the other day, you said, well, where's the guy that she was suspected of being unfaithful to? Well, there's just a suspicion. There's no proof. Because if a woman does commit adultery, then she is executed and the man is executed.
Yes.
Both of them
Yes.
are executed. That's adultery was a capital crime.
Imagine that.
In a holy society.
Imagine that.
But here it's just a woman who's suspected. There's no proof. But this is so important to God, the sexual relationship, sexual purity in the family and in the community,
Between
in
a
society,
man and a woman
is so foundational,
Yes.
so important. It was never, it's just sex with God. You know, I came across this is from the Midrash Rabbah, which is the ancient Bible studies. That these are things that Yeshua sometimes would quote. But this saying is thousands of years old. It's a commentary on this portion about the Sota. It says, whenever you see sexual immorality break out in the world, you will see calamities arise which do not make any distinction between the good and the bad.
Wow.
You know, you're talking earlier about the woman is like the keeper of the home and of purity. I believe that the woman has been entrusted with maintaining
everything,
a high
so much.
bar for our culture and our society. And when a woman begins to compromise sexual purity and holding men accountable for how they behave,
or decides, I want to be a man.
oh, we won't even go there. But if a woman will hold that bar high, men will arise to it. But if she compromises, all of society begins to collapse. Yeah. And you know, I can remember back when I was a kid in the 50s, and how things have changed from then to now.
No wonder the enemy has lied to women and said to them, what you do within the walls of your home does not matter. Yeah. No wonder he has propagated that lie, Grant.
It's the same lie the enemy spoke to Eve. Did God really say that? Yeah, come on. What's it going to hurt?
Yeah.
You need to be liberated.
And all of these things that have been given to you for food isn't going to satisfy you. That other fruit that he says don't eat of, that's the only thing that's going to give you the satisfaction you crave.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's such a lie.
Well,
such a lie.
Oh, we're already out of time. It's making me cringe because, well, you know what? I feel a little entitled to go overtime because, as we said, this is the longest portion.
That's right.
So let's add, we could talk about the Nazirite vow.
Let's go on to the Aaronic blessing.
Let's go on to the Aaronic blessing.
Important.
It's so important.
Because in the Parsha seasonings teaching I did for Nasso, I spent quite a bit of time on the Aaronic blessing. And one of the things that really struck me this year as I studied this is that this is the way that God puts his name on his bride. And in chapter 6, verse 22 says, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, So shall you bless the children of Israel, saying to them. And then it gives the blessing. Then after the blessing, it says, verse 27, Let them place my name upon the children of Israel, and I shall bless them. Now, think about it.
We bear his name.
When you and I got married, you took my name.
Proudly.
And this is how, not as proud as I was giving it to you. I remember you asked me when we were dating, is there anything about me you'd change? I said, just your last name. And
we've added to that list since then. Let's get
back to more honest with it.
Let's get back to the subject.
But here God is putting his name on his bride. That's really what it's about. And his name is woven through this in so many amazing ways. So here's the blessing. It's 3 lines, and it's verses 24, 25, and 26. The first line is 3 words, Yivarekeka Adonai v'yishmereka. May Adonai bless you and safeguard you. The next verse is 5 words, and it's Ye'er Adonai panoiv alecha v'yochaneka. May Adonai illuminate his countenance for you and be gracious to you. And then the last line is 7 words, and it is Yisa Adonai panoiv alecha v'yasim lecha shalom. May Adonai lift his countenance to you and establish peace for you. God's name is the second word in each of those lines.
Right.
There are 15 words in this blessing. And 15, the numerical value of that is Yud Hey, which is God's name, Yah.
Imagine that. And the culmination of all of these words to this blessing is Shalom.
Yes.
Which means wholeness.
Right.
Everything you need is present.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what he wants for us as his bride. He wants us to be vessels of his peace.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's how the world looks at us and knows that we have a bridegroom who takes care of us and who sees each of us individually and all of us as a whole as his bride.
That's right. So true.
It's so amazing.
Yeah, it's and there's so many other things going on here, but
to imagine that blessing being pronounced all those thousands of years ago, and we still say it today, and it still has the power. And that's what a blessing does. It it reminds us, and it gives the power of awareness of the divine within us and around us and in every moment. And when a father blesses his children over, on Sabbath evening, he reminds them that they matter to God and to him as a father, that they matter. And when a husband blesses his wife and a wife blesses her husband, that's what the power of a blessing is. Yeah. It's a reminder of the divine in this world, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And when Yeshua left this world, he had spent time with his followers, and they were probably struggling with the fact that he wasn't going to be among them physically anymore. But I was reading just this morning in John 16, he leaves them with a powerful word and a blessing. He says, "These things I have spoken to you so that in me you will have shalom."
There you go.
You will have shalom. Because, he says, in the world you'll have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. Yeah. And I think that is a wonderful way to end our conversation today and remind everybody, in this world we're going to have tribulation. Yeah. But take courage.
He's overcome the world.
Have peace, have shalom, because he has overcome the world.
Yeah. It's like he's taken a bride from a family, from a house where she's not appreciated, not loved, not being cared for. But he's preparing a place. He says, we're engaged, we're betrothed, you're mine. So let me finish our house. I'll come back and get you. You just prepare yourself. And at a time you don't expect, you'll hear the voice of the friend of the bridegroom, and you'll hear the shofar, and I'm coming to get you and gather you up, because I've put my name on you. You're mine. So in the meantime, just endure, be patient, and watch for me.
So good.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, we could go on and on and on, but...
and people probably are afraid we will. But we will say blessings and shalom until next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.